What happens when you've built a thriving business but haven't taken the time to plan what comes next? In this episode, I'm joined by Peter Culver, co founder of Freedom Family Office, where he helps entrepreneurs create predictable income, preserve their values, and design the life they truly want. Peter has started 4 financial services companies, authored 2 books, and brings a no drama approach to legacy and wealth planning. In our conversation, you'll learn why most estate plans fail across generations and how to prevent it, how founders can prepare their children for inherited wealth without creating entitlement, and the practical tools Peter uses to help clients move from financial complexity to clarity. Whether you're running a business, raising a family, or simply just planning ahead, this episode offers a grounded roadmap to building your legacy of love. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did. Peter Culver, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with us.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we start off this conversation, I want to start where we always start for listeners hearing a bit about you and what brought you to this work and to eventually founding Freedom Family Office.
Sure. So I'll try and do an abbreviated version because we don't want to gobble up all the time, right? So I'm a
Yeah.
lawyer by training.
Okay.
And basically, from a very early beginning of my practice, it focused on entrepreneurs. And initially, that was just happenstance. That's what somebody put on my desk to work on. But I ended up really liking that work. In the beginning, it was mostly contracts for entrepreneurs and their business, deals, so to speak. And a couple of my clients were successful and got wealthy. And that led me also then to get into, financial management, estate planning, tax savings, all that kind of stuff. So I did that for 12 years. And through a sort of unusual set of circumstances, I ended up being the lawyer for a group of people who started a trust company.
Oh, well,
And
perfect.
so I did all the legal work, and they hadn't really thought through, well, if we raise all the money we need to start our trust company and we have to open the doors, who's going to run the trust company? So they kind of thought, well, maybe the guy who put it all together, and part of that, unlike your practice, it was a state regulated, highly regulated trust company. So there was a whole process of setting it up legally, registering it, get a license, all that kind of stuff. So make a long story short, literally, we got this business off the ground and I walked across the street to a different office and went from being a lawyer to running a trust company.
Wow.
And I'll abbreviate the story, but I did that for 5 years. We ended up selling the trust company to a middle market bank that wanted to get into the trust business. And I didn't want to work for a middle market company. That was just my own preference. And through a funny set of events, I got recruited to work for a huge trust company. And they wanted me to be the president. In a way, it was the worst and the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my career, because in the beginning, I thought, oh man, I'm the president of a subsidiary of a big trust company, and I had a car and all this stuff. It was the most boring job I've ever had in my entire life because I had no contact with clients. It was a
Oh,
management job.
yeah.
So I actually ended up doing it for like 7 years, but it came to me that my life's work is working with people and helping people, not for big corporations and stuff like that. So I ultimately started my own firm, and along the way met the person who's now my partner, a fellow named Noah Rosenfarb, and we're sort of very different but very complementary, and we get along really, really well because we have a common motto, which is no drama. So we don't like drama. So He had a company, I had my company. We did a lot of collaborative work together. And what happened over time was we really had two companies that did the same thing, some for our own clients, but some for the same client. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense from a business perspective to have. So we put those two companies together 7 years ago, I think. Initially, that company was known as Freedom Family Office. It still exists, but today that company is just a registered investment advisory firm. It manages money. That's all it does. In a way, a bigger part of our overall practice is not the money management part, but is advising clients about financial planning, about taxes, about estate planning, about insurance, all that kind of stuff.
All the stuff. Yeah.
And the investment world is highly regulated. And some of that regulation, which is necessary to protect clients and all that good stuff, is not really applicable to our advisory business. So about 2 years ago, we decided to take that initial company and just have Freedom Family Office do the investing. And now we have a company called WealthThrive. And so it's a pure consulting firm. As I said, financial planning, taxes is a big part of what we do, helping people legitimately reduce their taxes, estate planning, insurance, those kinds of things. So
And so you'll work as a consultant regardless of whether or not you're managing the client's assets.
100%. And that's another reason for, so we like to say about a lot of our entrepreneurial clients, they're all rich, but most of them don't have any money, meaning any money in the bank, because they have all their money in their company. And a lot of them just don't believe in the stock market. They believe that they can control the result better in their own company. They think the returns may be better. And so the so-called assets under management model doesn't work with them. But they're very happy if they think you're giving them good advice to pay, in essence, a consulting fee for that. So that's where I spend most of my time, is advising clients in those areas.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I definitely have a lot of referrals for you.
Bravo.
Now that I know exactly what you do, because
Yeah.
a lot of times people do ask, they hear what, my title, oh, you're a private fiduciary, and they assume that, I'm giving all the kind of advice that you are, financial advice, tax advice, legal advice, which I'm not. I
Yep.
only sit in the role of really acting as trustee. That's where my practice specializes in.
That could be complementary in the sense that, except in a few, very, very few cases where my partner Noah and I have thought it would be useful for us to individually be a trustee, we don't
Yes.
hold ourselves out as fiduciaries. That's not our core business. It's usually based on a longstanding relationship with the family and their confidence in our ability to help navigate. Sometimes fiduciaries are required for independence in estate planning, right?
Yes. This is wonderful. I feel like this conversation can go so many places. I would love to start since, I mean, it really sounds like, so with the work that you've done, even from the beginning to now, kind of where you're at now with Wealth Thrive,
Right.
the focus is really you're serving a lot of entrepreneurs, so small business owners. What are their unique needs? And I'm gonna just selfishly ask you, when we're planning, our legacy, what are kind of the unique needs? And of course you just kind of spelled a few out where maybe part of the piece is that we have a lot of wealth, but not in assets under
Liquidity,
management. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think some of their needs really arise from the type of person that is typically an entrepreneur, right? So they're very control oriented, right?
Yeah.
So if we get into planning for a person like that, whether it's lifetime planning or legacy planning, you got to take into account their desire. Now, sometimes that's a bad thing that they want to perpetuate their control too much. One thing that's good for us in our business is most good entrepreneurs, even though they're high level control freaks, they're usually good delegators, right? So,
Yeah, that
average
resonates.
entrepreneur, unlike some clients, doesn't want to become an expert in estate planning to get their estate planning done. They want someone to look at their situation, tell them what they think they should do, tell them the pros and cons, and then help implement that. So, for us, that actually gives us a little more freedom just to get done what needs to get done rather than, 25 phone calls. You want to do this? You want to do that? Can we do this?
So I'm curious, are you finding that the trigger for people reaching out and consulting with you, is it really kind of proactive planning, or is it more of someone's nearing retirement and wanting to kind of get their affairs in order so that hopefully they're either A, selling the business or B, passing it on
Right.
to kind of that next generation?
So if we were on video, I'd show you an image that we use to describe in a way the answer to that question. The image is the image of an iceberg. And we all have heard and seen the movie Titanic and all this stuff, that there's more of the iceberg below the surface
Yeah.
than what you see above the surface, the so-called tip of the iceberg. So what we find in our business is there are a couple of things. A psychiatrist would call them the presenting problem, right? That triggers the client to reach out. And I would say in our business, maybe the three most common ones, which are very tactical. I want to pay less money in taxes. So either I can have more money or I can pass more money along. I'm worried about when I don't have my company anymore, where's my income going to come from, right? So now I have a
Mhm.
company, it pays my salary and it probably pays my health insurance, my car, half my meals, all that kind of stuff. So how am I going to navigate that transition from actively generated income to maybe more passively generated income? And then we have a third company, in addition to the two I mentioned, that develops multifamily housing for people. And so sometimes
Mm.
people reach out to us because they're interested in that. Now, where the iceberg comes in is so there's this initial issue that starts the conversation, and then we get into a conversation with the client. And what we find is when we get under the surface, what they're really thinking about is more qualitative than quantitative. And those can be things like, so a lot of entrepreneurs, by definition, if they're good business people, they're good at managing their own business. A lot of them are terrible at managing their own finances. And it's not
Mm.
because they're stupid. It's usually either they don't have enough time because they're so busy managing their own business, or they just didn't learn the skills that you and I work with all the time, right? Estate
Mhm.
planning, taxes, financial planning. But they have a desire to feel as successful in the management of their own personal assets as maybe they do in the company, right? A lot of them begin to think about, you would use the word legacy, right? So
Mhm.
was I just put here on the planet to start a company, grow it to great wealth, save it, and feel rich? Most of them get to a point that that's not enough, right? And so
Yeah.
whether it's giving back to a charity, a religious community, whatever it is, everybody has their own thing, but they're looking to add that incremental level of satisfaction to their lives. And so we've developed a little tag phrase and a whole model for working with clients, but the phrase is, we want all our clients to be rich beyond money.
I love that.
So nobody really wants to be poor, right? And so some level of financial underpinning is important. Different people have all different types, right? But I think most people, we look at money as a tool to help you do what you really want to do, which is most people don't jump out of bed in the morning and go, God, I have a great balance sheet, right? Or that's not the ultimate.
Yeah.
And we have a related concept of how we do businesses is what we call ideal life. So it's
Mm,
our version of what I would call begin with the end in mind, right? So
love
do you
that.
have a business just to build a balance sheet or a big profit? Probably not. So we have a series of exercises we go through with clients. They're fun exercises where we ask them to sort of close their eyes. Imagine it's 5 or 10 years from now. Now paint me a picture of your ideal life. Well, what would probably surprise a lot of people that aren't entrepreneurs is when we ask those questions to entrepreneurs, the answers are never about money. They never fill out the blank that says, I want to be worth 50 million or whatever it is. And what they talk about is where do they want to be? What do they want to be doing? With whom? A lot of it is sometimes
Mhm.
who do they not want to be doing stuff with anymore, right? So it's that qualitative part of their life they start to see is even more important than the quantitative part. And the quantitative part's just a tool, but it's a tool to help the client navigate from where they are today to some better place that they envision in the future.
That's also really kind of affirming for me and just my own practice. Not that I've been in
Yeah.
business that long, but soon enough I'll be approaching 5 years, and
Yeah.
that's kind of always been core to kind of my mission, and wanting to work with clients that I genuinely want to work with and really feel helpful. Another question, because I do
Yeah.
have a few listeners and myself included, where we're business owners, we're really proactive in planning, and we also have maybe little ones, so we're not really in the season of life of being near retirement.
Right.
My daughter's only 2, so she's not working for me. She's not working for me yet. I think with some listeners, I have had questions come my way of, what are kind of things that we can do that's good for the business and setting up the business, and also good for setting up their child for kind of financial success in life. And there's creative ways to do that. So I'm curious if you provide kind of consulting in that
100%.
respect, and maybe even if you could share with listeners if there's any kind of good places to start.
Yeah. So, I'll say a couple of things. So, on the business side, I think when you start a business, and if it's not anything you've done before, you tend to make it up on the fly, right? So, I've decided my calling is to be a private fiduciary. So, you just pick a name, get a bank account, have it, whatever it is. I think if your business grows to any extent, you start to realize that having a system for running a business is very helpful, right? Give it some order, some
Absolutely.
structure, have
Yeah.
some goals. Now, we happen to run our business following a system which in the world we live in is known as EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. But essentially, what it helps you do is get clear about what your short and long term goals are, what resources you need to achieve those goals, in particular, what human resources you need. And there's a whole concept
Mm,
in EOS called right person, right seat. So as your company starts to evolve, and it's quite structured, but we have found that you can just go on the internet, look up EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and I would say a lot of businesses, if they get to a certain size where the founder and everybody else who's working in the business, you're sort of feeling like maybe we're too much making this up on the fly. It's good to have a both a sort of organizational system and an operating system, right? So part of what we think about when we're working with our clients as opposed to running our own business is, and we don't just transplant the thing over to people, but in essence, we're trying to give people an organized system of managing their own finances, having short and long-term goals, having the right
Mhm.
helpers, all those kinds of things. And I think a lot of very successful business people, they may have that some kind of structure like that at the office, but they don't have it at home and they're not quite sure how to install it at home, right?
Well, I think that there's such value of kind of having that, outside
Yeah,
perspective, right? Because we all have our blind
understood.
spots. I mean, some of, I would say my best and worst clients, early on, I would assume, oh, attorneys, they're going to have everything in order. And just like what you're saying, for some of them,
Go
I've
and
been
visit their offices
absolutely,
sometimes, and you'll immediately
yeah.
figure out that that isn't the case.
And even administering estates downstream. We had one guest actually, and her dad was an attorney, and he didn't have an
Of
estate plan in
course, of
place.
course.
Yeah, so it's exactly the picture that you're painting, where yeah, we need that support too.
An area that I've spent a lot of time in is something that is sometimes referred to as the paradigm would make it seem like it's a good thing. And what I'm about to describe is not a good thing, is what's known as the phenomenon of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Tell us more.
There are two guys from New York did some amazing research which shows something like the following. 70% of first generation businesses have disappeared before the end of the second generation. And
Mm,
90%
mhm.
of them have disappeared by the third generation. Now, in one sense, all those statistics assumes that people wanted it to continue. That's a whole nother issue in and
Yeah.
of itself.
Well, I know that those are the same numbers just for inheritance.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, by the third generation, 90% of the wealth is gone. Yeah.
Leads to the obvious question of why does that happen? And so some other people have done a lot of digging into, but the common themes are a couple of things. Some are obvious, one might not be so obvious, which is one is just no knowledge on the part of the succeeding generations about what the assets are, what the plan is, and no knowledge, no experience, gained earlier in life to put them in a position to be able to effectively manage their inheritance, right? So I'm from New England, and people will often say, oh, I know estate planning. That's a surprise. That's what you find out when they read the will after the person's dead. That's a terrible,
Yeah.
terrible situation.
Yeah.
If the situation we're talking about is a family, what's really interesting is the families that fail most often have a very hierarchical structure. Grandpa, dad, son, right?
Oh,
And
interesting.
they don't, and if you think about the way a family operates, is it's going to expand. And what tends to happen is,
Huh.
like, I have a guy I do a lot of work with, and he'll do a presentation and he'll say something like, I want to pose a test. How many of you have all your first cousin's phone numbers on your phone? No one raises their hand.
Yeah.
And the point is that what a lot of studies have shown is more horizontal communication and joint effort as the generations go forward is very beneficial in preserving wealth.
Oh, interesting.
There's a guy named James Hughes. He wrote a whole book about what is the cause of the problem of wealth not surviving over time. And, most people, when I say wealth, they're just going to think about the money, right? But it's
Mhm.
broader than that. It's what are the family values that, the patriarch or matriarch wanted to
Mhm.
pass along, that kind of thing too. That's as much family wealth as anything else, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's so much of these conversations. It's just pointing that out for listeners, you know.
And there are literally now people who specialize in that specific area of sort of keeping families together as the generations kind of cascade down, and keeping them doing joint activities and having family meetings and working on projects together. So the people who have studied this, there's a famous lady who was the school psychiatrist at Beverly Hills High School. And somehow she got fascinated with, what's the impact of a life of privilege on the
Yeah.
financial skills
Oh,
of,
interesting.
and I think probably what she found is if you took 10 of those kids and 9 of them came from affluent families, they were a train wreck. But the one who came from a poor family learned how to manage money, kind of thing, right? So that's an interesting book about just how to talk to kids about money. Kids copy what you do, right? So
Oh,
if you want good results, you got to think about your own behavior.
oh yeah. I mean, absolutely what we model. Yeah. So before we wrap up our conversation, I would love to touch upon because, I get the sense from you that you're also supporting families kind of with creating a plan for
Correct.
succession.
Yes. I think with a lot of people, if you say, what's estate planning about? They would say one of two things, but neither of which are more important than the third thing. So some of them would say, oh, that's a document that says who gets my stuff when I die, right? Just
Yeah.
that, and that's true. That's true. That's not
It's
untrue
a
at
part
all.
of it. Yeah.
People who might be more affluent would say, well, yes, it does that, but it also has some slick tricks in there. So legitimate ones, so that I don't pay too much in taxes, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. What I think people don't think about, and it goes back to this whole concept of beginning with the end in mind, right? What are you really trying to pass on to your heirs? Is it stuff? Is it money? If you really think about it, and they don't have to accept it, right? But,
Yeah.
you know,
Or
what
acknowledge it. Yeah.
behavior are you trying to influence? What values do you hope that they'll continue? What charitable causes that you might be interested, or just a general passion for charity are you trying to pass along? So to me, that's, to use your phrase, that's the real legacy, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do a lot with our clients is, before you go to the lawyer, before you talk to some tax guy like Culver, think about what, if you were just talking to your kids about, you know, what you would want to be the impact of whatever wealth you left them, what would that be?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
some people do what's called writing a holographic will, which is not really a dispositive document, it's a philosophical document,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because it just came up today. So my partner has a trust for his family, which he calls the legacy trust. And most of the trust looks like a regular trust, and it has all the stuff in it. But at the beginning, and in about a 3-page exhibit to the trust,
Okay.
has a whole write up of what he thinks he's trying to accomplish for his family, which has nothing to do with money.
Yeah, well, we call that as a memorandum of intent. And
Same
I
thing,
love
right?
it. Whenever I
Yeah.
administer a trust or estate with that, it really helps. It's a story, it's a narrative. It's not just legal jargon, and it really helps. Who's ever acting and also beneficiaries know that this is really kind of the true wishes and intention of establishing this.
And I think if you don't start there,
Yeah.
and you went to the lawyer and they said, who do you want to get your stuff? And you tell them. And then they say, I have some neat tricks you might be able to do to save money in taxes. Okay. And those are those. It could easily be the case that just doing that wouldn't be consistent with your philosophy, right? So some parents are worried that their kids will blow the money or something like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So they want all the assets like locked up in trusts and stuff like that, which may not actually be good for the beneficiaries. Other parents have I started with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm dead, it's their problem. I'm not going to be here anymore. So I'd rather give them more freedom, little guidance, little backstop or something like that. So it's important to think those kinds of things through. There are all kinds of, whether you want to write a holographic will or not, that's a whole exercise, but there are
Mm-hmm.
online resources that would tell you what it is you should think about.
Yeah, we've had a few guests on the podcast that, yeah, I don't know if Legacy Letter, if you've heard of that,
Yeah,
but
of course. Yeah.
yeah, with
And
like
I'm not
Brewer, yeah,
advocating one or the other.
yeah.
Think about, you have a business, you're serving as a fiduciary. You've got some concept in your head of what you're trying to accomplish other than doing 50 cases a year and making a certain amount of money. You've got a philosophy about what you're trying to do with your business. So
Oh,
most
absolutely.
people would have a philosophy about what they want to do with their assets.
I love this, Peter, because I mean, we're really speaking the same language. And that's, I think, been so much of my inspiration of starting the podcast and having conversations like
Yeah.
this.
The person that I'm been mentioning a couple of times, we collaborated a lot. His name is Tom Rogerson, and he's kind of an expert in what today is kind of known as the family governance.
Mm-hmm.
That phrase came about because there's a lot of evidence that families that have some structure of governance last much longer than families that have no plan whatsoever, which is sort of obvious, but it's very interesting. The reason he got into that whole business is 3 or 4 generations back, one of his ancestors was one of the wealthiest people in America.
Oh, wow.
All disappeared.
It's all gone. Yeah.
And he says, kind of funnily, if they'd done everything right, I wouldn't be up here giving these speeches to earn a living. So he has some background, and he's seen some of the bad behavior even in his own family. So that makes, I think, what he says a little more poignant, comes from the heart. So much here to talk about, dear, but
I know. I know. Well, Peter, I really want to thank you for coming on today and speaking with me. As we wrap up this conversation, what would you love to leave listeners with?
so I would say all of the issues we're talking about, I think all parents, all families worry about. You know,
Yeah.
how will my kids grow up? How will they handle money? How will my wife or husband be if something happens to me? Right. And I think if they don't have experience in the technical skills that are necessary to solve those problems, they're paralyzed or terrified. And so what happens is they don't do anything. So what I would say is, in this whole area, both technically setting up your estate and coaching your children and all of that, they're just wonderful resources out there. People like you, maybe a little bit people like me, people like the guy Tom Rogerson, they're good people, people in the broadest sense that are fiduciaries, that are in the
Mhm.
business because they want to help their clients, not just help themselves. And almost in today's world, you can just start Googling and stuff will come up left and right. How to talk to kids about money. I bet if you put that in the internet, 100 books would come up.
Mhm.
So, take a little time to listen to podcasts. And then I would say this is a little bit selfish, but in some sense, having an advisor or a mentor, whatever you want to call it, you know, you wouldn't do open heart surgery on yourself, or if you were an accountant, you wouldn't do your own tax return, or you wouldn't write your own estate plan. There are people that specialize in helping people solve all these problems. So, get some help.
Wonderful. Well, I'll definitely include all of the links of where to find you and
Sure.
WealthThrive. I know that there's a lot of people that are already in my network, so it's good to know that there's consultants like you that exist.
So for the listeners and for you, I mean, our sort of general business model is, we'll take a call. Sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's an hour from anybody if they have some sense that what we've been talking about this evening is bothering them and we might be able to help. We can usually figure out in 10 or 15 minutes whether we're a good fit, right? And that could
Mm,
be, can we help them with what they need? Is there a good financial fit? Whatever it is. And then obviously, if that becomes true, then we could have a relationship. But, I think we look at our role as first trying to be helpful and second trying to make a living,
yes, I love that.
right?
Wonderful. Well, we'll include that. And there's links, is it to book a consultation on your website? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, they can do that.
Okay. Wonderful. That's generous of you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to join you. Fun conversation, and I
Yes,
wish you all the
likewise.
best with your practice.
Thank you again for coming on the podcast.